they said it was 7. The teacher who taught us rounding off told me if it's above 5, it's 7. So it's 6.7, which means it's a very high percentage. So and it's shocking. It means out of 10 people, 7 are actually experiencing this. Can we then see where are they experiencing it, or who is experiencing gender bias and inequality in the workplace? Can I have the next slide? Okay, and what was very interesting for us was who is experiencing this gender bias and inequality in the workplace. Because we know the workplace is segmented. We have new entrants, we have people who are in the middle of their careers, and then we have the old veterans who've been there for quite a long time. So, and our information and demographics were also segmented in a way that we also take that into consideration. New entrants, people who are in senior and middle management, those who are in executive positions. So 50%, which is the age 25 to 30, are the people who are experiencing gender bias and inequality in the workplace, which is something that really shocks me, because I remember when I was 25 and going for 30, some of these things were not even reading that they are happening. Only now that I'm in the purple range that I'm actually realizing I have to experience this. So can we go to the last one, which this one actually now tells us where in the workplace are we experiencing, where that big chunk of 50 people between the age of 50% of people between the age of 25 and 30, where are they experiencing this gender bias and inequality? As you can see, 73% is experiencing this in the workplace environment. So be it in the office, be it anywhere, be it in travel, like the story that Tembela helped us with when we're starting, shows that the workplace is where we experience all this. And then we also have 30 for meetings, and then we have work performance evaluation at 7%, and then we have job interviews sitting at a big 10%. And how much of the 10% actually makes people not even enter that workplace? Because if it's at 10%, it means it's huge. And then the others are segmented at 3.3% each, from whether they're receiving this from female team leaders, or is it from, or they've not experienced it, never, or sometimes in a work trip or in a taxi rank going to work. It was important for us to include the taxi rank because we want to take you back to our conversation in December last year, where we're introducing also the Convention C-190 of ILO that extends the world of work and includes the time that we're going to work now. So we also wanted to see where does workplace biasness and inequality start. And we can already see that it starts before we even enter what is traditionally called a workplace, in a sense of walking into an office. So I really want to leave these three shocking, I would say, for myself, states, or revealing, if I were to use a better word rather than shocking. I want to leave them with you so that they also help you navigate the conversation that is about to happen, because we have 4 beautiful, wonderful speakers who have contributed in immensely different ways into actually addressing issues of gender bias and inequality in the workplace. And first and foremost, I want to introduce womxn, Mathebula, and Sinesipho Nqayisa. They work as a team, so I have to introduce the 2 of them. So womxn and Sinesipho are the voices behind one of South Africa's top and most promising podcasts for young people, for young Black women. It's called The Sisterhood of Traveling Mgogo, and it was launched back in 2018 by strategist Sinesipho Nqayisa and voice actor womxn Mathebula, who were keen to chronicle their journeys through adulthood on a platform that will allow thousands of others to share in their reflections. from family, love, womanhood, healing, rage, gratitude. There's no place that the duo is afraid to discuss, to go in the discussions they had on their show. So if you want to see them, they are streaming live on Apple Podcast, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Google Podcast, and it's called S Mugoyo. And I think I also just want them to talk about how did they get to this word and what does it mean? Because I see they say it means unpacking umgoyo, which means the process of going through something. And I've never heard about this word, so I'm quite interested as to how did they come about it, but it makes me want to be a listener and engage constantly with their podcast so that I can learn well. So without further ado, I want to hand over to Mixo and Snesipo, and they're going to segment how they speak because they work as a duo. Over to you.
Good evening. Oh, wow, we went at the same time. That's funny. That's very cool. Hi, guys. I hope everyone is well this evening and not too defeated by capitalism. I am feeling the burn. But my name is Snesipo, and as Sistolile introduced myself and Misho, we work together on a podcast. I am a marketer and Misho works in banking, but I'm sure she'll elaborate a bit more on that. And thank you guys so much for having us here. I can already tell that it's going to be a very insightful and weirdly enough, it also feels like it's going to be a very comforting session because I think when we share our stories and when we learn about how each person dealt with what they've gone through, it kind of cushions us if we ever come across that story, but also it reassures us that this is actually not as personal as it might have felt in the moment, but that it's a big systemic problem that we all need to continue to contribute towards fighting. I'll let Misho introduce herself before we get into the cues or the questions that we were given for today.
Okay, thanks so much, Sniper. Yes, so my name is Misho Matebula, and I am a root cause analyst in banking, a process engineer by profession. And yeah, part of the Sisterhood of the Traveling Go, where, we chronicle, every bit of this life as, young women, navigating, so many different spaces, work, personal lives, love, friendships, all of that. And I think Usisko asked us to explain how the word came about. So we didn't create the word. It's a word that came about on social media. It started off, I think, as going through the most, and then I think Xhosa people just kind of changed it to Mgo. And so it was a play on the movie title Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. And we just, because it's about force, women who are best friends and, essentially like sisters, and how they kind of navigate love and heartbreak and each other's friendships and all of that. And so that is what brought us to the name. Over to you, Sniper.
All right, so I'll get started. I'm not sure what the format is, whether people chip in with questions while we're speaking or we wait until the end. I think we prefer people talking or asking questions or commenting while we're speaking because that just makes it feel less formal and less intimidating. So I don't know if that's allowed. Please let me know. Affirmative, negative?
Our worry is that if we allow that, the challenge is that it might actually be difficult to control the conversation because sometimes such conversations become too fiery. So if people can put perhaps their comments and questions on the chat, and then after all three of you have spoken, then we will open up the floor for conversations.
Sure, no worries. I'll start with the first question. So it was, what is your understanding of gender bias and inequality in the world of work? And I think I wish I had less of I wish my understanding wasn't as deep as my experience of it. I don't know if that makes sense. I think I would love to live in a world where we would be able to define things and not necessarily have such painful experiences tied to them. Because with gender inequality and bias in the workspace, it can be such a stagnating, if that's even a word, experience that you often learn less and grow much less because of how much this is infringing upon you, as well as your right to freedom of movement, as well as your right to safety, and as well as your right to be preserved or groomed in the accurate way within the workspace. So I understand gender bias as, even though people like to, we tend to do this thing of speaking about bias as a subconscious thing, as if it's happening by mistake, as if it's not inherently serving us and we aren't aware of how it does serve us. So I always like to speak of bias as something that is happening on purpose, that serves those who are on the other end of this process of marginalization. And it's something that preserves those who are on the other end of this process of marginalization. So everything that a bias takes away from you, it feeds the person on the other end, which is why they continue to exist, right? So within the workspace, with gender bias, it exists to cushion, to preserve, to maintain the advantage that men have within that space. And its core reasons are to A, frustrate you to the point where you feel that you can no longer contribute, or frustrate you to the point that you doubt yourself so much that you feel that you don't belong. And it is such a layered and coded experience to have, because in order for it to exist for so long, it has to be covert, right? Which means it's very difficult to explain. It's difficult for you to go to someone and say, I am being discriminated against in this and this way, because they code it in a way that you will almost always sound crazy. And that's always been my experience of it. And I think when it comes to inequality in the world of work, that's a bit layered. And I don't know if Misho, you'll agree or you have a different experience, but I think my initial work experience, my first like proper job, I worked as an intern at Conhill. And it was the first time in my life that I realized how much inequality is not only confined to the practice or the systems that exist in terms of what we're doing here at work, but also in terms of what was pointed out in the survey that was shared with us before, that inequality exists throughout the process of you trying to attain any semblance of upward mobility. So the inequality that you experience in the form of sexual harassment at the taxi rank has an inevitable experience on how you can perform in the workspace or how confident you can be. And that will obviously affect how much you can move up within that space. So it's like, these things are so married to our experiences of life that it then becomes difficult to even imagine what we would be like or how confident we would be if we did not have to go through this process of learning how to identify these things that are affecting us in this way, as well as fighting for ourselves after having this knowledge. So that's my understanding of gender bias and inequality in the world of work. I'll hand over to you, Misho. I don't know if you go to the second question or if you want to address this one too, because I spoke for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement with Sniper. I call her Sniper. So don't be confused. I'm in agreement in terms of kind of the way gender, inequality, bias and inequality just kind of presents itself and kind of how it can stand to you. But I guess, we can, we'll sort of touch on sort of its effect a little bit later. But I mean, I've had, experiences of gender bias and inequality. I mean, when we were having the survey, I think someone was asking about, I think they asked about sexual advancement, I don't know. But I mean, I had that at the beginning of my career. So in like 2018, I just joined, you know, I'm young and I'm excited and I am ready to just, you know, to get going. You know, you have all these ambitions and all these things that you want to do. And very early on, I started noticing that there was a man there that was, you know, sort of making advances at me. But in the beginning, you know, you're like, I'm just imagining this. Also, I don't want to make it seem as if, you know, so he would move in such a way that was very like, it wasn't out there, but it was like in the back of your head, you were like, no, something is going on here. But at no point did he outright say, okay, this is what I want from you. And it eventually evolved to him actually, you know, sort of being outright about it. And I was very confused by the brazenness of the whole situation. I mean, I had never worked in an organization that large before. And so I was very confused. Why was this person so brazen about it? You know, like they were very like, you know, when someone openly flirts with you in the office space and you're just like, what is going on? And so, yeah, I mean, bit by bit, it started chipping away at my enthusiasm of this new job. You know, I was becoming less and less enthusiastic because now I have to deal with the fact that, you know, every morning I'd wake up, I'd be like, oh my word, I have to go to the office and I have to deal with this person and their advances. And this wasn't someone who was on the same level as me. This was someone who was ahead in my department, or in our sort of, yeah, business department, I suppose. And so, you know, I wake up every morning and I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to go face this situation. And I don't know how to, because first of all, I'm new. Secondly, I don't know my way around, you know, and thirdly, the times when I did kind of speak to people were like, oh yeah, he does that. And I was like, and that was completely deflating because it was like, okay, but you know, now what? What do I do? And then, you know, you sort of notice small things like the relationships that, you know, because when we speak about abusers and sort of abuser traits, what they tend to do is to sort of form relationships around people that you would typically go to for safety, right? And so he had this really close relationship with our HR business partner. Like they would drive to work together and back, lunch together, and all of that. So I knew that there was an immediate barrier in that regard. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it eventually chipped away at my enthusiasm, at my progress as well, because you know I wasn't performing at my optimum. It definitely stunted my growth in that regard. And I don't think we realize just how hectic these things are. Maybe because it's so normalized, I don't know, but maybe because it was my first time, it was very much like a, you know, a shock to my system. And so that's what I understand, you know, gender bias and inequality in the world of work. And then in terms of what our experiences or views are on the intersection of race, gender, and age, I think those intersections kind of, I mean, you can even add sexuality, right? I think those intersections exacerbate gender bias and inequality in the world that we're currently living in right now, where it is okay to sort of, you know, where we have these hierarchies and some people are at the bottom and, you know, all of that. And just kind of these narratives that are created around young Black people who aren't Black men. You know, the younger, well, yeah, the young, first of all, it's a whole thing of like, oh, this person is young and they're naive. So we can kind of take advantage of these people, or take advantage of their desperation as well, because this person knows that you are a young person, you're starting out your career, you're excited about your career. And sometimes they mask it in such a way of like, no, don't worry, I can help you go forward. I can mentor you. I can help you with this. Don't worry, you don't have to, you know? And also then there are certain narratives created around you that if you're self-assured, you are then perceived, you know, as cocky or arrogant, and that can kind of, sort of result in you being isolated, right? And so imagine being in a workspace where you are being harassed in such a brazen manner, it's normalized, and you feel isolated. What now? What then happens to you? And you end up not having anybody to sort of turn to, because it's kind of completely normalized. It's seen as something that's very normal. But anyway, let me move on. Sniper, you can take over.
Thank you for sharing that. That's actually like really heartbreaking. I get upset every single time you share that story, because it is so disgusting that grown men who should be a safe space for you actually turn out to be the main perpetrator in corporates. I think we've got 2 minutes left, so we can actually just reflect. I think for me, question 4, why is it important for workplaces to take deliberate initiatives to address gender bias and inequality, especially where young women are concerned? I think the one thing that is the worst thing anyone can ever experience is not being believed, right? And then in the absence of safe spaces that are not human-centered, you run the high risk of being extremely isolated and feeling like no one is going to believe you. I think we need to create safe spaces that abusers cannot hack as easily as they can other humans. Because when Misha was sharing her story, it's true, abusers will literally find all of the people that you are most likely to go to for help, or all of the systems that you are most likely to try access for help, and ensure that you feel extremely isolated, so much so that you'll never even try to initiate that process. So I think if we could find ways that are not as human-centered in a way that can be manipulated, we would do so much better, because we would be dealing with an issue that is affecting confidence and your right to safety on such a level that it then hampers your ability to move forward within the workplace, which is something that we all want to do. So yeah, I don't know if you want to have any closing words, but that 10 minutes flew.
Listen, I think I agree with you in creating those sort of spaces. We talk often on the podcast about the divide that exists between sort of younger and older women, right? And I'm really happy to be in this space where it's intergenerational. There's so many different ages that exist. And so I think, what feeds gender bias and inequality really is misogyny and racism itself. Internalized misogyny, that where we have that divide between younger and older women, where we're not talking, where there's a sort of friction amongst one another. I think once we can, I hope, when we can bridge the gap between the two, I think, we'll be able to do way more. So yes, before we go over the 10 minutes. Thank you.
Wow, I'm quite excited that you have seen that you are about to go over the 10 minutes. And but what I like is that you kept us very hooked on your real experiences, because I could see and hear that these are experiences that are from what you've been experiencing in the world of work. And also you have really synthesized and analyzed, went beyond just the experience and said, why is this happening to me at this space, at this time? Which becomes very important when things happen to us, because then we are able to then come back in a much more stronger way when we are now responding or having to continue being in that space, but we come back a bit stronger. What I take away from your conversation is your acknowledgement of the intergenerational discussions that need to continue, not only from a perspective of, I know these things happen, but from a perspective of, what are your experiences? These are my experiences together. How can we use each other's experiences to navigate this misogynous space that really patriarchy and capitalism that continuously ensures that men, especially white men, are the winners in this environment. The second takeaway is around going beyond policies, because what we are saying around issues of something that enables people to report, even if it's anonymous, it means we need to go beyond just putting policies, but also putting safeguards around those policies. So I'm quite excited because the next speaker is actually going to speak on a case study, which kind of then now says from the experience of your workplace, which was corporate, the next speaker, Professor Grace Kuno, is going to now also give us insights into the world of education, particularly universities and the world of higher learning. And Professor Kuno is a professor and the director of scholarship change in the Department of Leadership and Transformation at the University of South Africa. She is a member of the executive of the International Sociological Association and previous president of the South African Sociological Association. She is also an active member of the editorial board for the ISA SAGE Studies of International Sociology, a C-rated national NRF researcher, and her research in particularly looks at the Black condition through focus on gender, health, social policy, class, Black middle class, and social institutions. And I am glad that she comes in to also share a case study from her own work and from her own experiences of interacting in that space of higher learning. Over to you, Professor Kuno.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and I also want to acknowledge Mixo and Sinesipho. I think their personal experiences are quite important for thinking through what Mixo talked about. The conversation between older and younger women. And when she was speaking, actually, I realized that I'm not young anymore, and that, what she was saying actually was quite suitable. And it's quite, saddening to hear that young Black women are experiencing the same things that we experienced some 20 years ago. And this basically indicates that we have a long way to go before we reach this equality. And I also want to, I think the stories shared by Mixo and Sinesipho are so important, and that I wanted to make a few points on those before I move into the presentation that I prepared. I think this platform is quite significant for giving young Black women experiences credibility, because in more cases than not, when you are Black and a woman, what you experience is not believed. And it is important for us to continue creating spaces and platforms where these stories can be shared, so that we can begin to, see the experience as credible speakers on some of these issues. And that is one way of continuing the work towards achieving gender equality in South African workspaces and in the world as well. What I also recognize from the stories is that, we have a lot of work to do in terms of having those conversations. I had a conversation with a colleague and friend a few days ago, and she was indicating how her daughter started a job about 2 weeks ago, and she's already experiencing racism and gender inequality. And when we encourage young women to take up educational degrees, diplomas, we tell them that having those degrees and diplomas means they will have a better life. However, what we don't share is that the workplaces that we have in South Africa in particular are not welcoming and ready for educated Black women who know their worth, who understand what it means to be a citizen, who speak back and who challenge. So we don't train them that the workplace is not ready for them. And as a result, they get into these spaces that are not ready for them, and they are treated so terribly that their mental health is impacted negatively. And I think that is something that we need to pay particular attention to, especially also thinking about COVID and the impact that it has had on women who work, who do wage work, and who were forced to do wage work in a context where they also had to do caring work. So we need to be quite, careful when we think about the future, what we recommend as the best way going forward. For some women, especially middle class women, it might be easier to work from home, but that might not be true for women in the working class. And even for women in the middle class, working from home might be linked to gender violence. So we need to be very careful when we think about a way forward as we continue dealing with COVID. So I'm now going to speak to the presentation that I have, and may you please stop me 2 minutes before so that I can wrap up and not take too much time. I would like to start my talk by indicating that even though gender is an important analytical lens, we need to constantly interrogate to what extent does a gender analysis reveal or occlude other forms of oppression. This is especially important when we engage with realities in historically racist and heterosexual contexts, and in a context where we have growing movement for representation of individuals who are not gender conforming. So we need to recognize that gender is race and race is gender. Having said that, I would like to acknowledge the significance of a gender lens in helping us understand how gender inequality manifests and is maintained. The bias, gender bias that we can see this gender bias through gender disaggregated development data. And therefore, a gender lens remains significant. However, we need to be quite critical when we are using it to make sure that it does not take away from an opportunity for us to understand how other forms of oppression impact on lives. Gender bias has been defined as the tendency to prefer men over women. Such a tendency disproportionately impacts women's success in multiple spheres of life and in institutions, including the family, the workplace, in education, and in the political sphere. The expectations born of gender bias by those who use it to control access to privilege, promotions, pay, and benefits has negative life chances for those not considered the norm. And in this case, I'm referring to women, those living with disabilities, and non-gender conforming individuals. This bias is seen when looking at development indices where women and gender non-conforming individuals makes up the majority in lower paying positions and the majority in indices of poverty. For example, the World Economic Forum, the 2020 World Economic Forum report shares some interesting data. I would like to recommend that report to all of you, colleagues and friends. Unfortunately, this report shows that gender inequality continues and it will continue for a while, even though there is some progress. According to Basadi and feminist writers and feminists in politics around the world, the most important issues that we need to consider when thinking about gender bias and also for thinking about acknowledging or achieving gender equality is political participation or leadership, economic participation and access to opportunities, educational attainment, health and health and survival. Although these, for these important issues, we've seen a number of important gains over the years, there's still a long way to go to achieve gender equality in these four issues. For example, with regards to educational attainment, and I think this part of my talk speaks to Mixo and Sinosipos experiences. For example, educational attainment has implications for workplace success and improved life chances, which suggests that women's chances will improve the more educated they get. However, according to the 2015 African Gender Development Index, which was put together by the CGE, because of the masculine privilege, what we see as gains for women in educational attainment does not reflect in who sits in leadership positions and also in high-earning positions. For example, the index shows that we have more women writing and passing matric, and we have more women entering universities, and we have more women leaving universities with qualifications. However, when we look at the post-education structures in the workplace, we find less women in leadership positions, and we find more men in leadership positions. We find more men in high-paying positions. The question then becomes, what happened to all those women who earned degrees and other educational attainment? Why are they not in these positions of leadership? Why are they not earning more? And the answer to that is masculine privilege. Even though young boys drop out of high school in large numbers in grade 10, many of them are able to get chances to do degrees and to achieve other educational attainment as they work, and they are favored for promotions to leadership positions as compared to women. There is a huge gender bias. With regards to gender and work and why that bias continues is because men and women are concentrated in different jobs based on what is considered appropriate masculine and feminine work. For example, you'll find more men in professions of law, in engineering, and more women in caring positions like nursing, teaching, which are not considered significant in society in terms of how they are compensated, whereas the historically masculine positions like engineering are paid and considered more significant. This is true even though many of us know that women actually carry multiple burdens as they have to play a role in caregiving responsibilities. And these caring responsibilities are quite significant, as we have seen during the COVID-19 lockdown, where the majority of frontline workers are women in nursing, frontline workers in teaching, and frontline workers in retail, in supermarkets have been women, and thus they have been impacted quite negatively by COVID. So this gender bias continues because we still consider who should work where based on traditional gender roles. So with regards to women and work, I wanted to share some statistics to illustrate how women are impacted quite differently as compared to men. In 2007, I think Stats SA, I might be wrong, indicated that the number of unemployed young women stood at over 52%, and the majority of employed women at the same time was at 34%. This has a negative, influence on life chances for women. And it also means that we will continue to have more women as illiterate and in more roles that are underpaying. Most importantly to note is that since 2000, the gender pay gap has narrowed. However, in 2007, it was still between 25 and 35%. According to the 2020 World Economic Forum, none of us will see gender parity in our lifetime, nor luckily will many of our children. I thought that I should share that so that I can alert us to the fact that gender bias is a serious problem for life chances of women and individuals who are gender non-conforming. And also, I think it's important to note also for individuals living with disabilities. And this is because a number of most workplaces are refusing to change their values and to recognize that what was historically seen as the norm is not going to work as we are trying to build societies that are more inclusive. In 2020, this gender parity gap was sitting at 31.4% globally. And the World Economic Forum acknowledges that even though
Prof.
Sorry? Hello?
Yes, Prof, we're just saying, can you move towards rounding off?
I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Hello? Okay, I'm gonna continue. The World Economic Forum acknowledges that even though many countries are making progress in closing the gender gap, these processes are often slow. A disturbing finding from by the World Economic Forum is captured in this quote, open quote, projecting trends into the future. The overall global gender gap will close in 99.5 years on average, close quote. With regards to economic participation and the current opportunity gap, it will take 257 years for the gap to be closed, close quote. I wanted to share that so that we can begin to see how challenging this gender gap that is caused by historical biases around thinking that wage work is for men. So it basically means that we have a long way to go. So in conclusion, I want to just say that, as we think of a way forward for building what Professor Lenkabula calls inclusive futures, we need to dismantle heterosexual white middle class masculine privilege. We need to critically evaluate what makes women and men vulnerable and what they are differentially vulnerable to. An important aspect to consider in this critical engagement is that different women and different men in terms of class, sexuality, race, age, and where they are in the world, means that their experiences will be different. A disaggregation of these issues will allow for nuanced solutions and will provide an opportunity to explore and to avoid simplistic policy recommendations that may fail to address the underlying causes of gender inequality in different contexts. We also need to continue disaggregating development data on experiences of poverty and include non-gender conforming individuals. There is a need to focus on gender relations. Focusing on women in isolation from their social relationships does little to address the power imbalances rooted in social relations that lead to women's greater vulnerability to poverty. That is a quote by Bridge, 2001. Finally, we need to take into account that poverty experienced by women is multi-sectoral and multi-dimensional. It is experienced in different ways at different times and in different spaces, and therefore our engagement with this gender bias needs to take those differences and nuances into consideration. Thank you. I hope I didn't take too much time.
Thank you, Prof. You did go a bit over your time, but it's Women's Day today, so we're going to volunteer that time back to you. So what I did take away from your conversation is that there's an element of untruth when it comes to how we are actually portraying the preparedness of young women to enter the workplace. There's also an untruth in actually thinking that once you are educated, the workplace is going to roll out a red carpet and welcome you on board and say, oh, wow, we've been waiting for you. Go on and do what you need to do. There's also an element of, again, a myth. We call them myths on this platform. A myth where we want to tell ourselves that the workplace has transformed in a way that it no longer uses the gender biasness or the eye of inequality when it looks to a woman who's about to enter the workplace. The fact that you alluded to a number of positions that continue up to this day to be held by men that pay higher than the jobs that are held by women. And even sometimes when women enter those spaces, you find that there's something that we call a gender pay gap that exists, and it's justified because now the job is held by a woman. So there's quite a lot of work that still needs to be done. And I tend to then say, go back to how women entered the workplace. Women entered the workplace because at that point, no one else would have done the jobs that were needed during the World War II. So women entered without the space being conducive or made conducive for them. And for all these years, we've been spinning around and around trying to make the workplace conducive for us until COVID hit. And all of a sudden, there was a realization that women don't only come to work as women, they have other roles that they come with. So how do we then, in the process of resetting the workplace and going forward, how do we then bring those roles and start in our sense of saying we're doing diversity and inclusion? How do we put those as part of the key pillars of enabling the work environment? If I go back to the example of womxn, where they were talking about policies that don't work. Here again, we have transformation policies, but those transformation policies sometimes don't work when you put them through the test. You also spoke about the fact that some of the policies or the workplace cultures still use gender binaries. So where you find that we are expecting a man and a woman expressing themselves more in a heterosexual manner, and we have not actually looked at the other sexual orientations and expressions and actually say, how do these show up in the workplace in an inclusive and diverse manner in a way that doesn't make me feel I am not needed, I'm not wanted in this workplace, I am othered in this workplace. So it is actually getting more and more interesting the more I'm listening. And I'm also happy to now lead in our last speaker, Uzani Mashinini, who has worked on human resources and has an experience of over 20 years in various industries and countries, both within and out of Africa, fulfilling her various HR roles. Her focus has been largely working on generalistic and as an HR generalist, sorry about that, as an HR generalist, yes. And in the last 10 years, has focused more on roles as a center of expertise, e.g. talent, learning and development, HR analytics, and talent acquisition. Zani is currently studying towards a master's in management and business executive coaching with the Wits Business School in South Africa. Her research paper focuses on women in leadership. She holds an honors in industrial psychology from University of Rhodes, and she also has a postgraduate qualification in global human resources from the University of Liverpool in the United Kingdom. She is both a coach for female senior professionals dealing with issues of diversity, inclusion, and incorporate, and is a mentor to HR professionals across various industries and countries. And what I like about Uzan being in this space is that she also brings this to these policies that we put as HR practitioners, because I like your experience in a generalist within HR, because one of the key roles was ensuring policies are in place. And as you moved up and worked more on HR, you then also have also been exposed as to whether do these policies that we put in place work. Are they policies that work for everyone, or are policies that have to be targeted? And in my world of being a gender specialist, we'll even call them gender responsive policies, because they then put on the lens and the intersectional lens that comes with multiple identities within gender itself, and also multiple sexual identities and expressions within the broader spectrum. So I'm very excited and very like wanting to hear your experiences, and also how you then can, from your experiences, also start responding to some of the key takeaways from the previous speakers, and also some of the issues that we are seeing on the track, as to then what becomes the response of HR in this space. Are they a partner? Are they what? Are they facilitator, catalyst? What becomes the role of HR really? But you have your own reference of questions that you'll be speaking through. Thank you, Zani.
Thank you so much. And this is such a great opportunity for me. I just want to say thank you for inviting me. I think your question is quite a simple one to answer. And I mean, by no means suggesting that it's a very easy topic. It's definitely complex, but policies are not enough. Governance alone is not enough. And unfortunately, being an HR practitioner for many years, that's what I've observed, is that on many occasions, these complex issues are addressed through a governance lens alone. So unfortunately, we found ourselves as HR practitioners sometimes being the facilitator of the governance process, because that's the strategy and that's the approach that your typical organization will take. Just a little bit about me, and I'm giving the HR practitioner view and lens. Currently, I've done research and I've been spending a lot of time with women in the workplace that are wanting to advance, and how through coaching, I've been able to pick up what are the struggles that women are going through. Listening to the stories earlier about abuse, about female behaviors being misunderstood. So if I'm confident, that behavior may be misunderstood for something else. The fact that even my confidence could be impacted. The fact that there's a gap between younger and older women. The fact that my rights feel violated and I'm working in a male-dominated environment. These are all very common issues, unfortunately, in the workplace. And as the younger generation enters the workplace, we're finding there's more challenges. So yes, we're talking about gender, but actually what we should be thinking about is how organizations or workplaces respond to diversity. If I look at some of the comments, we're not just talking about me as a woman who is heterosexual or who's homosexual, whatever I may prescribe to. But what is important is to understand how our male-dominated environments, particularly patriarchal cultures, particularly, how are they responding to diversity? Are they looking at it from, let's do the bare minimum, which is I'm a listed company on the South African Stock Exchange, Johannesburg Stock Exchange, sorry. So I'm going to do things that are going to put me in good light so that I maintain whatever I want to maintain as an organization. Is that the lens through which I do things? And if that's the case, then we will see that the changes actually don't happen. Instead, what we've done is we've put a curtain and we've hidden all the things that are happening beneath. And that is why we've got all these stories. That's why we're still having these conversations, because we know what's happening in the workplace, whether it's South Africa or whether it's on a different continent or other countries within the African continent. So for me, what I'd like to talk about is my observations, not just from being an HR practitioner, but of late, I've been a coach and working with women. I've formed mentoring circles and mentoring groups where I'm offering myself as a woman to other women in my profession to see how my experiences can support them in the form of mentorship. What I've found working with women and working in corporates is that this challenge and this complex phenomenon that we are discussing today, we're talking about gender inequality, is very complex and therefore cannot be addressed through one frame of reference. We can't look at one type of solution. We actually have to look at things far more systemically. What I mean by that is, if you look at organizations, they've actually done quite a lot. You can actually count the initiatives. There's mentoring. They have succession planning. They have leadership development programs specifically for women. All those initiatives exist. But the question is, why are we still here today? Why are we still having these types of conversation? And it's because when those initiatives are being executed, they've been done from one lens. The one lens could be, let's just hire more women. And so we hire more women, the more the women arrive. And to use Grace's point, when they arrive, is the culture welcoming and is the culture ready? Because the woman that arrives may not be the one who's quiet, may not be the one who wants to be silenced. They may be the courageous type, the authentically courageous type who want to challenge, who want to speak up, who are assertive. And does the environment receive them in that light? Or does the environment fight them? And do we find that as quickly as we've been able to introduce them to the environment, we quickly exit them from the environment? And that is why you'll find stories of women quickly coming in and quickly leaving. What we're seeing is that young individuals are also quickly coming into organizations and quickly leaving organizations, because the organizations of today, unfortunately, are still male dominated, and they are battling to receive the different profiles of skill that we have available, whether it's in South Africa or in other countries. So what I've observed, though, is not only do we need these initiatives, but we need to look at things systemically. For example, when we're looking at putting in a leadership program, you may also want to include ways to reinforce the learnings from that leadership development program. So I looked at a case study where women were invited to participate in an exclusive leadership program for women. What happened is that when the women arrived back in the workplace, they were then expected to just apply their learnings. And they find that the system was still, because it was male dominated, it was still very difficult as a woman to translate my lessons learned from these exercises, these leadership development programs. And so what I've been able to do is work with these women and apply coaching. And coaching walks with the woman through the journey that they're going through, whether it's discrimination, whether it's battling to do things like networking. So we have found that coaching is a very nice tool for women in the workplace when looking at gender inequality issues. The other issue that's come through my observations is that you cannot exclude men from your initiatives. So as much as you may have diversity and inclusion initiatives like let's build leadership development programs, let's hire more women, let's
put more women in leadership positions, we still need males in a male-dominated environment to participate and to sponsor. I mean, we've got wonderful case studies. I always quote Camilla Harris's story. Her story is phenomenal. When she tried to progress in politics, she admitted that she failed. But when she got sponsored by a Joe Biden through her ability to network, etc., she saw different results. It's not an isolated case, and I'm by no means saying women can't succeed without men, but it does help in a workplace environment to ensure that whoever leads the dominated culture, whoever reflects the culture, needs to be included in the interventions. The other observation I'm making is that women themselves are struggling to deal with discrimination. You spoke about younger and older women. The older women who are in the suite roles are the ones that have to learn to now pull up the younger women, but are battling to do that. Or when they're doing it, it's difficult. And I'm not saying it's not happening, but they are finding it challenging. There's research that is actually written on this that has proven that women are struggling to lift other women because that's how they're dealing with discrimination in the workplace. They're actually finding it quite a challenge to risk their credibility by bringing up another woman and fearing that if I invest in this other person, they may fail and that might discredit me. And this phenomenon is called Queen Bee phenomenon. There's actually a wonderful article written about this phenomenon that I encourage a lot of women to read up on, because it'll explain quite clearly, and it articulates it very well, why women struggle to mentor each other, why women struggle to sponsor each other, and why women are struggling to network amongst each other. It introduces wonderful concepts like social capital, which suggests that if women lean in on each other, and if they use each other's resources and see each other as resources that can enable themselves to manage through or strive through all these challenges, they're actually using social capital amongst themselves, not just in general, but amongst themselves. And those are some of the interventions that workplaces need to participate in. So if you're going to build a leadership program, try and make it enable the woman to do things like networking, to be able to approach a sponsor, to be able to approach a mentor, include men in those programs so that they're actually visible and are participating in the solutions that are required in these challenges around inequality. And one of the things that I think I'd like to also mention is that it's very important for us women as well to work through our own self-awareness. How am I managing this environment? How am I able to respond? And which resources are available for me to be able to develop the skills that I need. I may need to be more courageous, more resilient. I may need to improve the way I network, because for me to advance, I'm actually going to have to reach out and lean into those different types of skills. So I think for me, as much as we've spoken about the challenges, the observations I've made is that the solutions that I've mentioned have to be done in a systemic way. We cannot approach things from one angle because it's going to take a lot more than the one or two things done in isolation to actually challenge the current system or manage the current system. So that's all I'm going to mention for now, because I'm sure I've gone over 10 minutes and happy to take questions later. Thank you very much, Tembela.
Wow, thank you so much, Zani. I think I will not try to summarize the things, I mean, that you have said. The one thing, though, that I just want to raise from what you said is that is this whole thing of the curtain that we tend to put to cover up everything else. And I think for me, the challenge that we all have is to actually work towards opening that curtain and expose what is really happening in the world of work. And I think some of the stories that we're getting to hear today are actually stories that are helping us to actually, put off the lid and say, hey, we may be talking about these things, but the reality is, I mean, it says something different. And again, Zani, one of the things that you are mentioning, which I think is also very important, and I think for us who are here, especially those who've been participating in these platforms, is just that reminder that we cannot take one way to actually deal with the challenges that we are faced with. So we do need that systemic lens into addressing the issues of gender bias and inequality that we are facing in our workplaces. And again, I think also previously, we have had the need to include other people and not just be thinking that we are going to address these problems as women alone. And I think for me, it also is one of the discussions that we've also been having amongst the WomaNiko Associates in terms of saying what is the role of men and in addressing these issues. And I think for me, and it also came up last week as well when we had that session, is that we really need to look at this role and make sure that when we invite men to partner with us, we are not actually asking them to take over the role that we are supposed to be playing. We were talking about someone today who's a man, and every time when he speaks, you always find that even though they were saying they're trying to help you, but you actually left thinking that there's nothing that I actually got in that. If anything, we've actually further empowered these very men. So how do we work with men in ways that are going to ensure that they don't further silence us? And again, I think one of the big things that has come up here is this whole intersectional lens to the issues that we are dealing with. I think Prof as well earlier on talked about the importance of looking at the other people that we don't normally speak about, you know, like, and we always assume that women are homogeneous. And in that process, when we talk about gender, we actually again cover up a lot of other people that are marginalized by our systems and our own analysis. So I see that there are a number of, thank you so much for all those comments. And I see that there are a number of comments on the chat. Can I just read those comments? And perhaps if there are people who want to share or ask questions, this is also your chance to speak, because we've only had a few people speaking today. So we also want to hear from you as well. One of the charts by Vyokas, and perhaps the panelists and even other people on the floor can also respond to the questions that have come up. Vyokas is saying, sorry, I've just lost Vyokas' comment. But I think she was saying she wants to know how people that are gender non-conformist experience the workplace. Yes, there's another layer to this conversation of the experiences of men who experience abuse in the workplace. The fear is also that one is not seen as a real man when reporting experiences of abuse. Are there studies on this aspect? So that's another question now from Semi. But the specific question Paviokas was saying, how do non-binary confirming women navigate their workspace? So I don't know whether there's anybody else who wants to share on that. Can we just open the floor either to the panelists or to people here in the discussion to share? Vyokas also earlier, Vyokas normally saying, I was never prepared for the oppression we experience as women in the workplace. Someone else who is not the Tembela who's speaking was saying, gender inequality often happens in the mining industries, where these industries are predominantly dominated by men. So there are a lot of Tembelas in the session. So can people rename themselves and put their real names? So Semi again is saying, Zani, I love the idea of looking at the issue of gender biases from a systemic way and therefore looking at the health of the system as well as the shifts that are required in both women and men. Kale is saying we need to think about ways of adopting indigenous African practices on how women in traditional societies supported each other. I think it adds on what Zani was talking about earlier when she was talking about the issue of social capital. And Sinesipho has also shared a number of documents that we can access. Thank you so much, Sinesipho, for doing that. Okay, anybody who wants to speak or share or perhaps respond to some of the questions that have been raised here?
Tembela, it's Zani here.
Yes.
I hope it's okay. I'm not able to project, but I think, there we go.
Go ahead, Zani.
I think for me, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I think I can't comment on specifics around a particular type of identity you may have in the workplace, because for me, as I said earlier, I find workplaces are struggling in general around attracting a different type of workforce. Whether I'm younger, I'm of a different generation, whether I've got a different sexual orientation, whether I'm of a different race, but as long as I don't look like the predominant or the known artifact, or I don't have the identity associated with the culture of the organizations are struggling to accept. And I think the one thing I just wanted to say is mention that diversity and inclusion is a challenge in general, whether you are in those different categories or not. And I think we all also come with unconscious bias that we are not aware of, hence why it's unconscious. Myself, I have, and I need to work on understanding what that looks like. So for me, my own recommendation is seek the mentoring, seek the coaching if you can. Try and network with other women in similar situations and form that group that tries to connect with each other on similar issues, because that strengthens your way to respond to the environment. Doing it alone is not going to be enough. Like I said, this is a complex matter. And for me, I think latching on those different types of resources definitely helps. And I think that's important to remember. And that's a contribution I'd like to make there.
Thank you, Zani. That is so helpful. There's also a comment from Zianda saying the legal field is no exception. I've seen time and time again preferring to solicit formal legal opinions only from males. The unfortunate thing that is that even women themselves fall in this trap. We have a long way to go, but having these conversations is a step towards the right direction. And that is actually so true. And Zani is saying, we also come with our own unconscious biases. So we need to continuously, reflect on the lenses that we ourselves are using when we engage with these issues, and be asking ourselves, whom are we excluding? Who is included? Who's put on the margins in the way in which we talk and in the way in which we engage.
Can I come in, Tembela?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we also need to recognize that some of the issues we are talking about are structural, are more structural than individual. So it as much as individuals can try to navigate the space, there's a challenge where, they are structural and systematic to an extent that some individuals, will, struggle to even find solutions, because that's how the systems were created. So in an environment where women were not considered the norm for wage work, when women struggle in wage work spaces, it's not necessarily because the women are weaker or the women are not up to scratch per se, but because the spaces themselves are not transforming, and the agents that women have is not is not enough to change systematic, historical, and structural challenges. And therefore the solutions should be not, for individuals to necessarily change themselves, but for policies, to be effected to make sure that there's equality, that when people don't adhere to, the principles of the Constitution, then, those institutions must pay, they must, made to take responsibility. Because what happens when individuals, and I'm speaking here in particular with regards to young and older Black women, that when they try to fight these big institutions with long histories, with big pockets, and with big lawyers, they end up losing, because they are individuals. They are fighting these institutions as individuals. So we need to be cognizant of that fact, that these are structural, that we can't assume that, individuals will change these spaces. That's why we need multiple voices. We need action in multiple spaces. We need resources. We need institutions to help us create, the equality that we require. And we need, individuals to help us identify these biases and look at, other ways of finding lasting solutions.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Prof. Before I call in Micho, you are so right there, that in as much as there is an element of an individual agency, that we must not lose sight of the fact that we are actually dealing with structural issues, and therefore the need to work together. I actually think that's very important. And one of the things that I had actually seen, and perhaps it's just my gripe, is that sometimes you tend to see big institutions wanting to work alone. And I think one of the challenges that we also need to place on ourselves, as well as organizations that are working on these issues, is to say, how do we partner both the big institution and the smaller institutions, the individuals and the influencers, and also people who are not influencers. So there is that need to really think about how do we work in different ways that do not further marginalize smaller organizations or small players. So that, I think for me, that's one of the big challenges that we actually need to walk away with from here. And Micho, I see that you've got your hand up. Before you speak, let me just read what Dumisani is saying. And he's saying, I include men and boys in my community mobilization efforts to curb gender-based violence and sexual harassment. The question is, how do I have this work centered away from perceptions of pushing a patriarchal agenda, being male myself, and make it, and to make it accountable to women and other human rights institutions? That's a very important question that you are asking there, Dumisani. And again, I want to open the floor, not just to the panelists, but like other people as well here who have got a view on what Dumisani is saying. So Micho, you come in, and then there is also Malihoko, sorry for that. Please, you need to say your name properly. I've actually just slaughtered your name there. Yeah, Micho.
Yeah, I think I'm just kind of mirroring what Prof. Kuno was saying, that it's not just an individual issue, and that it is sort of structural and it's bigger than one person, right? And what that results in, and I mean, maybe just sort of the history of just sort of Black people in the workplace and just, Black women in the workplace, there's an inherent pessimism when it comes to sort of these structures that have been sort of put in place. I mean, I know in my previous workplace, they'd have these forums where it's they're talking about, you know, we must blow the whistle on sexual harassment and, you know, abuse and all these. But even then, you know, you're just there and you're like, oh, this is just for optics. I still don't feel safe enough to kind of come forward and say that this is what happened to me at the hands of this person, because also we've never seen people being made an example of, right? Or if it does happen, it's very much behind closed doors. It's very much, you know, not spoken about. You just 1 minute, this person is no longer around. That's if it does happen. And so, I mean, yes, we see the policies. I guess they have to, you know, adhere to some of the policies. You know, to say that, okay, yes, we've put up this policy, but I think from a what is it? From a, you know, putting these policies to practice and actually making examples of people who make these workplaces unsafe and, you know, whatever. We don't often see that, because then now they'll also be like, no, but he's a great manager, but he's a great this and he's a great that. And it's like, I could also be a great manager. I could also be a great head of whatever, but because I'm dealing with this situation, it is stunting my growth, and it's very clear that I'm not going to move forward. And as a result, I now feel the need to sort of get out or to go somewhere else. But I am glad that there are, you know, resources available, you know, for mentorship and the like. And, you know, I mean, had I known, I definitely, you know, would have gotten into that quite early on. But I mean, personally, I sort of developed, as we call, trust issues around all of that, because it was just like, you just don't know what you're going to expect. And I would love to progress in my career. You know, I have all these grand plans, and sometimes it just kind of feels like, you know, you're stuck. And so, yeah, I think, you know, it would be great if we saw people being made examples of, we saw consequences of these actions often, especially in big corporates. But I guess we remain hopeful.
So the big question there is, what do we do to institutions that promote these social ills against us? And I think we will ask the last question on Mentimeter. It would be nice if when we answer our second question there, we could actually try and address that question of what do we do to institutions that fail us, that continue to promote gender bias and inequality, that continue to silence women, that continue to exclude people. Can we, sorry, that Mentimeter question just came up before I was ready for it. So please don't share that, Gachi, because we have someone else who wanted to speak. Yes, Malihoko. Unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi, everyone. And thank you for, for this important conversation. And yeah, I just wanted to make a comment, and I'm sorry I missed, most of the presentations. I had to attend another meeting. But, this is an interesting topic for, I think for all of us, and, for some of us that, that also work in this space. And it's quite disturbing. I mean, listening to the stories that were presented here in terms of women's experiences in the workplace, and yeah. So as you were speaking, I was thinking about, I mean, earlier on somebody mentioned the issue of safe spaces in the workplace, and for the work that I do, because I've looked at sexual harassment in the labor movement, and particularly in COSATU unions, and that's one of the the important things that for women in the unions, that having those safe spaces was so important, that as women themselves, they have spaces where they can talk outside, the bigger, outside the big organization, so it's their space where themselves as women, they can have their own conversations where, when they converse with each other, they don't have, the fear of not being believed that, this actually happened, so it's a safe space in that sense. And, and from that experience, from that work that I've done, that, it's not even easy, even amongst the women themselves, to trust those spaces, but also to work together. And I think, there are important histories, in some of these organizations that, we can use, in these forums, that, there is that history in the labor movement, and I'm sure in other spaces as well, that, we need to bring out, these histories to inform, the strategies going forward. And the point that I wanted to make is, that the disintegration in terms of our work, on these issues, that, we have so many organizations that are working on, on the same issues, gender-based violence and harm, and but I think all of us, we are working in different spaces, and there's a need for, a bigger forum that, that brings all these institutions together, and that can also tie in with the labor movement as well, because women in the unions have been doing this work for since the early 70s. They've been fighting this struggle. So this struggle on sexual harassment, it doesn't start now, in the 90s or, 2000. It's been there since the 70s, So there is that history of activism, in that space. But there are histories in different spaces, and it's important to, to talk about these histories, and, and also to help, young women who are going to enter the workplace next year, or, in the coming years, so that, they find the space ready, and, they don't enter these spaces and then they are surprised that, oh, these workspaces are like this. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Please say your name before you step off properly so that I can.
Malehuku.
Malehuku, okay. Thank you so much for that. I actually hate, pronouncing people's names badly. Thank you so much for that.
Well, so you did well, no problem. Thanks, Tembeda.
Thank you. So I will take you, I think my colleagues are here. We are definitely going to take you on that one, because honestly speaking, there is absolutely no way. This platform alone is not enough. We do need to partner together, with lots of other organizations that are doing similar work. And like as I was saying, it's been actually very interesting in that for us, when we try to reach out to other organizations, it's been such a difficult time that I've actually been spearheading even what we are talking about today. So we'll definitely reach out to you to see how we could actually continue partnering with you around this work. And you are so right that it is actually important to actually realize that this is not just the beginning. This is not the beginning of the work. This work has been done for a very long time. What is important is for all of us to actually find each other, because that's the only way we are going to fight this battle. I see a few comments there. Sko is saying the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence, I don't know what is F, is one place where under Pillar 5, the issues of economic power are addressed. So we also need to be looking at that. Okay, there are also suggestions there for the books that need to be, that we can actually explore, and other resources that we explore, that we can use. I think I will, on that note, just ask Kaki to help us with the Mentimeter. Thank you so much for everyone who has shared some ideas here. remember that again, we both have individual responsibilities, but we also have responsibilities as a collective. So when we try to answer the questions, let's also think around that, the fact that we are dealing with systemic issues. So there are things that we can do as individuals, things that is touched a lot on some of those issues. And we also need to be thinking about how do we address systemic issues. So the first question on Mentimeter is, what can you do where you are to contribute to gender transformation? This is again following up on the challenge that we were left with by the young people who had their own session on Friday, who were saying, hey, we know that you like to talk amongst each other. Yes, it's good, but we need to go beyond that. So how do we, what are the different things that we can do to contribute to gender transformation where we are? I'm mindful of the fact that we are just left with a few minutes before the end of the session. Please don't run. I can see that people are hopping off. We are almost finished. We will not keep you for long. Yeah, we'll try to keep the time. So there are only 3 people who have said, one is saying I can use my voice, offer practical solutions and educate. Someone else is saying we can speak out, take initiative in contributing to creating enabling spaces. Another one is saying we can ensure that I can ensure that people around me don't feel alone and isolated in their experiences. There are people who get it and can support you as best as possible. So if ever there's anyone here who feels like they are alone, we need to understand we are not alone. Start to record or note the different incidents, yes, evidence, which is actually quite a problem. I remember, I think it was on Friday where people were talking about the fact that one of the challenges with issues of gender bias and inequality or sexual harassment is that it is always left upon the victims to actually provide evidence, which is such a problem. And the other one is saying I can amplify the message, educate those around me. Can I ask you to go to the second question? So the second question, thanks so much to those who have responded on this one. The second question, Kake, can you please put up the second question? Yes, the second question is, no, we've got a wrong question there. It's asking whether you've experienced gender bias and inequality. Oh, apparently we don't have the second question. So can you answer on the very same answer as to can you answer a question about what can we do as a collective to address issues of gender bias and inequality? We've just answered what we can do as individuals. So what are the things that we can do as a collective to address gender bias and inequality in the workplace? So you can just continue answering on that question. So what can we do as a collective to address gender bias and inequality? So for instance, there was an idea earlier, which I actually used and tried to rephrase to say, what do we do, for instance, to the organizations that continue to perpetrate inequalities, that continue to protect those who exploit others, those who are responsible for gender biases in the world of work? And as we answer that question, can I invite Sco to come in? So we will still keep Mentimeter open for people to comment. So we will not close it so that you answer the question of what can we do as a collective to address gender bias and inequality, to address the issues that were raised here. I remember one of the shocking stats by Prof earlier on when she was saying, in our lifetime, none of us will see gender parity in our lifetime. That was actually quite shocking. So if that is the case, what are the things that we can do to address the systemic issues that continue to breed gender bias and inequality in the workplace? So as we try to answer that question, are you able to come in and summarize what we have heard today?
Yes, thank you, Tembela, and thank you to everyone who has contributed either through presentations or the chats, and also the questions and the answers that we've received. So I've been asked to just summarize the key takeaways, and one that really stood out right away is us moving beyond compliance. So in every speaker, we were aware that policies that were in place or the practices that were in place were not really working. So that's the first key takeaway that I had. Then the second one that I also had is that we are not dealing with just something that just happens, but we're dealing with structures, and we're also dealing with systemic issues. So if we are dealing with such complexity, we then also need to come up with complex solutions that are very focused to dismantling, because we need to dismantle. We need to dismantle these patriarchal spaces, but we also need to identify, to know that once we see it, when we see it here, you need to know there's a root cause somewhere. So how is it systemical, and how has it been normalized over the years? So systemic and structural, we need to approach them in a very nuanced and very focused approach. And then the big one that kept on weaving through the conversation, which is my final one, is the impact on mental health of the person receiving, on the receiving end of gender bias and inequality. We heard how you then get preoccupied about how do I avoid exposing myself to the perpetrator. And this then in turn affects the productivity in the workplace, it affects engagement in the workplace, and you end up even having to leave the environment, and no one really asks you, why did you leave? It's assumed you got a better offer somewhere else. So those three things for me were really hanging up. They're part of what we are taking away from here. And it is then also very important, finally, that we then we impact horizontally and also vertically, so that we reach far and wide in how we frame our responses and solutions to what we are experiencing in the workplace, in all our positionality, whether we are individuals, whether we are leaders in the workplace, or whether we are also generating research and being activists and advocates. Almost every one of us has a role to play in the role to change this environment. Thank you.
Okay, on that note, thank you so much, Sco, for that quick summary. I'm just looking at the time. It is 8 o'clock. I just want to say thank you so much to our speakers for tonight, for the stories that you've shared, for the research that you have shared, for the ideas that you have shared, and for challenging us tonight, but also just for making the time. We know that before, I mean, when you are invited to speak in any platform, we put a heavy burden on you to go and think and reflect and research. So thank you so much for taking us so seriously and for being here tonight. You've left us once again with a lot of insights that we are left with. And I want to say thank you as well to the participants who have set aside these 2 hours and continue to engage with us. I've seen some nice ideas that have been coming up on the chat on some of the things that we need to be be doing to continue the conversation, but also to make sure that we don't only remain, like safe enclaves, which is important, but also we try and move ourselves forward in addressing the issues that we are raising. And I also want to thank the staff from the WomaNiko Associates, both that is from WomaNiko as well as the World Health Company, for the time and the amount of effort they have put in organizing this session tonight. We really appreciate the hard work that you are doing behind the scenes. In closing, I just want to mention 2 things that we will be doing going forward. We've been challenged last week, and this is also something that we've been thinking about previously. We've been challenged to actually do quite a bit of work. One of the things that was raised was that it is very easy for organizations or individuals to just pledge. When there is a call, they just pledge, or by clicking a button. Yes, that's good, but that's not enough. So we have a coaching a program that we will be starting mid-April. We're calling it Beyond the Pledge, Coaching for Gender Transformation. So the idea is, how do we empower one another so that we do not only participate in platforms, but we also do something in the different places that we find ourselves in. So it's a coaching program for gender transformation. We're calling it Beyond the Pledge. It is starting in April. So please do look out for the adverts around that. This is going to be a paid one, so it's not going to be free like the session that we've had tonight and last week. Then we also have the young people that were there last week also challenged us and asked us. We have a program that will be starting. We're calling it Gender 101 series. It will also be starting in May, Gender 101 series. That is also going to be a paid program. So we hope that those of us who feel like we need more empowerment, we are hoping that we'll participate in that. So thank you so much. Continue to stay safe. And yes, we would love to see who is here. If you have the time, you can just write a word that you are leaving us with. How are you feeling after this conversation tonight? You can just write on your chat. You can also unmute, and you can also put on your video so that we can just say bye to everyone.
Cheers.
Wonderful.
Thank you for the conversation and the platform. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Yes, it's nice to actually see people's faces.
Yes.
Because it also makes us to know that we are not just looking at the screens.
Hey.
Thank you, everyone. Very informative, very challenging for me. I appreciate this space. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Rosani.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
By the way, I did work for Sonke for 11 years.
Oh, really? So we are taking you back to your
Prof. Rateli was once a board member at Sonke. But
wow.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Bye all.
Bye.
Thank you, Tembela and team. Lukhanyi Sukwinana.
Oh, thanks, Mzala.